A White House press briefing on May 6th exposed major uncertainties in U.S. policy, from vague remarks on trade talks and sudden deportation plans to Libya, to unexpected praise for Houthi rebels. What dangers do these shifting policies pose for American families? At a recent White House press conference, President Donald Trump offered vague responses to critical questions, raising concerns over clarity in U.S. policy direction. When asked whether China initiated the latest proposal for high-level trade talks, Trump simply stated, "They want to, we'll see," without elaborating on the controversial plan to deport migrants to Libya, a country under a Level 4 travel advisory due to terrorism, kidnapping, and armed conflict. He admitted he was not fully briefed. Senator Thom Tillis, a key member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, announced he would not support Ed Martin's nomination as U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., potentially blocking the confirmation vote. Tillis also said he is reviewing a proposal to ease tariffs of up to 145% on select goods, but gave no timeline or implementation plan. Trump further proposed recognizing May 8th as Victory Day for Houthi and November 11th as Victory Day for WWI, while keeping the current holiday calendar unchanged, saying, "We already have too many holidays." The lack of clear policy signals on tariffs and immigration is raising uncertainty among businesses and families. Prices for imported goods such as strollers and child car seats may remain volatile, while immigrants and local communities are left in limbo over potential sudden changes to residency and labor rights. In May 2025, the Trump administration plans to use military aircraft to deport undocumented migrants to Libya, a nation currently under a Level 4 do not travel advisory from the U.S. State Department due to terrorism, kidnapping, and armed conflict. Since April, the administration has also expanded tariffs under a reciprocal retaliation policy, pushing duties on Chinese imports to nearly 145%. Electronics now face an additional 32% tariff, while household furniture imports are subject to a roughly 45% increase. The Libya deportation plan has sparked alarm among human rights groups, who warn that vulnerable migrants risk exploitation by trafficking networks and face serious threats to their safety and well-being. At the same time, steep tariffs are driving up retail prices, especially for electronics and home goods, placing added pressure on family budgets and contributing to a broader rise in the cost of living across the U.S. In early May 2025, President Trump announced the end of Operation Rough Rider, a U.S. air campaign targeting Houthi forces in Yemen. Trump claimed the Houthis had capitulated and said he would take them at their word, that they no longer want to fight, calling it a positive step to protect American shipping. The move could help stabilize maritime security and ease supply chain disruptions for both imports and exports. On May 7, the Federal Reserve held interest rates steady at 4.25 to 4.50%, but issued a strong warning. Elevated tariffs imposed by the Trump administration are increasing the risk of stagflation, where high inflation combines with slow growth and rising unemployment. Import prices ticked up in Q1 2025, prompting concerns over continued price volatility. The Fed's warning serves as a reminder that consumers may face ongoing fluctuations in the cost of household goods, fuel, and other essentials, putting further strain on family budgets. Intense negotiations between the U.S. and China in Geneva have concluded with a framework agreement aimed at temporarily easing the trade war, yet, with gold prices hitting record highs and American businesses continuing to warn of policy risks, the question remains, is this truly a victory for the U.S. economy? On May 12, 2025, after 2 days of negotiations in Geneva, the U.S. and China reached a temporary agreement to reduce tariffs for a 90-day period. Under the deal, the U.S. lowered tariffs on Chinese goods from 145% to 30%. China reduced its tariffs on U.S. goods from 125% to 10%. The tariff reductions are expected to ease price pressures on imported goods, especially in sectors like toys, apparel, and electronics. However, the 30% U.S. tariff remains significantly higher than previous levels, and may continue to affect consumer prices and product choices. The agreement includes a phased tariff reduction mechanism contingent on China fulfilling commitments to open its markets and end currency manipulation. However, prominent U.S. business leaders, including Warren Buffett and Jamie Dimon, have voiced concerns. High tariff levels are hurting domestic companies, and there's a lack of transparency in trade policy. The uncertainty surrounding trade policies could lead to price volatility and weakened consumer confidence. As a result, American consumers may continue to face unstable prices and limited product choices, at least in the near term. President Trump signed an executive order aimed at maximizing the extraction of minerals, timber, and seafood in Alaska. The move boosted shares of gold mining companies like U.S. Gold Mining Inc., USGO, with gold prices soaring to a historic high of $3,400 per ounce in early May 2025. Rising gold prices may increase production costs in industries that rely on gold, such as electronics and jewelry, potentially leading to higher prices for consumers. While the temporary U.S.-China trade agreement has eased tensions and provided short-term benefits for American businesses and consumers, the core issues in bilateral trade relations remain unresolved. U.S. consumers should be prepared for further policy shifts and market volatility ahead.
American farmers are enduring a brutal economic fallout from trade wars with exports, collapsing production costs, soaring and no solutions in sight. Can the U.S. agriculture sector survive this disaster? Sorghum exports to China have dropped 95%. In just 2 months of 2025, U.S. sorghum exports plummeted from 1.4 million tons to just 78,000 tons compared to the previous year. China once bought 90% of U.S. sorghum, but the market has vanished almost overnight. Other major crops like soybeans, corn, and wheat are also suffering, with prices falling and stockpiles growing. This sharp decline in demand is leaving U.S. farmers with millions of tons of unsold crops in silos, significantly hurting cash flow. The lack of buyers is pushing family-owned farms to the brink of extinction, especially as prices continue to plummet with no market alternatives in sight. China has raised tariffs to over 125% on a broad range of U.S. agricultural products, including soybeans, pork, corn, cotton, and dairy. In addition, the EU has also imposed 25% tariffs on key U.S. farm exports, like soybeans and processed pork, in retaliation for U.S. steel tariffs. Countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Russia are now filling the gaps left by the U.S., signing long-term trade deals that are shifting global supply chains. Permanently, farmers are seeing their once dominant positions in global markets erode with tariffs, pricing U.S. goods out of major markets like China. The agricultural sector faces long-term structural losses that will be hard to recover from. American farmers are now competing with cheaper products from other nations, leaving them vulnerable to further losses. A New York dairy farmer is facing an additional $2,200 in costs for livestock feed due to new tariffs on Canadian imports. Prices for fertilizers, seeds, and machinery are all on the rise because of tariffs on U.S. trading partners, putting immense pressure on farmers' budgets. Meanwhile, crop prices are falling, creating a double squeeze on U.S. farmers' profits. The escalating costs of production are making it increasingly difficult for farmers to turn a profit. With the prices of essential farm inputs like feed and fertilizer rising, and crop prices declining, many farmers are struggling to cover their basic operating expenses. The economic pressure is mounting, threatening their ability to stay afloat. Rural banks are warning of rising default risks as farmers face growing pressure from unstable crop prices and mounting debt. Many farmers are hesitant to sign contracts due to market volatility, fearing they will grow crops no one will buy. Despite some calls for new bailout packages worth billions, Many farmers are voicing a preference for trade deals over government checks. As the financial crisis deepens, farmers are facing a real threat of bankruptcy. The increasing instability in the agricultural sector is putting banks and small rural economies at risk. The proposed government relief packages are seen as short-term solutions, with no clear path to restore long-term market access and stability. The United States has ignited a new trade war with China, creating a seismic shift that has prompted the European Union and Canada to reassess their positions. A global realignment of trade flows is now underway. The question remains, who will ultimately hold the balance of power? At the beginning of 2025, the Trump administration officially restarted the trade war with China, focusing on key sectors such as electronics, steel, aluminum, chemicals, and high-tech components. On April 6, 2025, the United States announced additional tariffs ranging from 34% to 50% on over 600 categories of goods, with cumulative tariff rates potentially reaching up to 104%, according to Reuters. The objective is to reduce the U.S. trade deficit with China, which stood at USD $383 billion in 2024 U.S. Census Bureau. However, according to the Consumer Technology Association, the prices of laptops and smartphones in the United States rose by 7 to 12% in April 2025 alone. Bloomberg Economics projects that consumer inflation could increase by an additional 0.3 to 0.5 percentage points in the second quarter of 2025. Essential goods such as electronics, construction materials, and automotive components are at risk of significant price rises, potentially raising the overall cost of living. As the United States imposed significant tariffs on China at the beginning of 2025, the European Union and Canada, two close partners, began to question their dependence on the United States. Currently, annual bilateral trade amounts to approximately USD $995 billion between the EU and the United States, including $450 billion USD in US exports and USD $545 billion in EU exports, and about $400 billion USD between Canada and the US Census Bureau, according to surveys conducted by Eurobarometer and the Angus Reid Institute. 55–60% of citizens in the EU and Canada do not support the U.S. trade war. Furthermore, 60% of Canadians support independent pipeline projects aimed at reducing reliance on U.S. energy infrastructure. Across Europe, particularly in Germany, France, and Italy, public sentiment is increasingly skeptical about the stability of the U.S.-EU relationship. These developments could directly impact energy prices, the cost of imported goods, and job opportunities in industries closely tied to U.S. trade, especially as many countries seek to diversify their economic partnerships. Following the imposition of new U.S. tariffs, financial markets recorded a negative reaction. The S&P 500 index declined by 3.2% in April 2025, according to Bloomberg, reflecting investor concerns over trade costs and corporate profitability. Meanwhile, China has begun attracting additional trading partners. According to estimates by the World Trade Organization, WTO, the EU and Canada could redirect approximately 5% of their annual trade toward China. If this trend continues, the United States could lose hundreds of billions of dollars in trade value over the next 5 to 10 years. Canada is also exploring options to expand its energy export infrastructure toward Asia to reduce its dependence on the U.S. market. CBC News. European companies, particularly in the automotive and technology sectors, are increasing their direct investments in China to access the larger market and mitigate risks arising from trade tensions. This shift could result in higher prices for U.S. imports into Canada and the EU, while Chinese products may become more widely available. The United States and China have entered a new phase of confrontation with a wave of record-high tariffs, triggering widespread manufacturing freezes and mass job reductions. What is truly happening, and who is bearing the brunt of the consequences? Since March 2025, the U.S. has raised import tariffs to 145% on a wide range of Chinese goods, including textiles, electronics, and auto parts. In response, China imposed a 125% tariff on U.S. products, escalating trade tensions and disrupting global supply chains. Losing access to the U.S., which made up about 15% of China's exports in 2024, has forced many factories in Guangdong and Zhejiang to cut hours or shut down entirely. Many workers have returned to their hometowns due to job losses. Domestically, production has declined amid weak consumer demand. China's CPI fell 0.1% in March, while the PPI dropped 2.5%. The fourth straight month of decline. Industrial electricity use in key manufacturing regions fell 7 to 10%, signaling a clear slowdown. Meanwhile, U.S. consumers are feeling the effects as prices for Chinese imports rise. 5 to 12% households in states like California and New York are reassessing spending, especially on electronics and clothing. Following the 145% U.S. tariffs, about 15% of China's exports have been affected. Factories in Guangdong, Zhejiang, and Fujian are cutting production or suspending operations entirely. Canceled. U.S. orders have led to rotational layoffs, lower incomes, and a wave of workers returning to their hometowns. Due to job shortages, Goldman Sachs estimates up to 20 million workers, that's 3% of China's labor force, could lose their jobs if exports keep falling. Small and medium-sized businesses, heavily reliant on U.S. orders, are facing widespread bankruptcies. The impact extends to young workers. In 2025, China will see 12.22 million university graduates, yet CNNC China National Nuclear Corporation received 425,284 applications for just 8,000 positions. A sharp labor market imbalance. The social effects are mounting. Unemployment is rising, incomes are falling, and many families are struggling with debt. Several local banks have reported an increase in non-performing personal loans since the first quarter of 2025. China has stated it will negotiate only if the U.S. lifts the full 145% tariff. Meanwhile, the White House is reportedly considering reducing the rate to 50 to 65% to ease tensions, according to Reuters. This comes amid mounting pressure from businesses on both sides over disrupted supply chains and rising trade costs. As a countermeasure, Beijing has suspended acceptance of 179 Boeing aircraft scheduled for delivery between 2025 and 2027, and halted imports of maintenance parts. Bloomberg estimates this could cost Boeing over $1 billion. Chinese airlines are adjusting maintenance schedules due to part shortages, raising the risk of flight delays during peak travel seasons. In the U.S., the aviation sector is under strain. Thousands of workers in states like Washington and South Carolina face job cuts or reduced hours as production slows down. Meanwhile, in China, rising maintenance costs are pressuring low-cost carriers and could lead to higher airfares, directly impacting passengers. China's silent trade retaliation is shaking U.S. industries from aircraft and autos to finance. In what could become the most severe supply and trade disruption since 2020, is the American economy ready for a prolonged decoupling from its largest manufacturing partner? China has quietly suspended acceptance of 84 Boeing aircraft, including 737s and 787s, originally scheduled for delivery in Q2 and Q3 of 2025. This move is seen as retaliation against the 145% tariffs the U.S. imposed on over $300 billion of Chinese goods during the Trump era. Within just 48 hours of the report leaking, Boeing lost more than $28.4 billion in market capitalization. Meanwhile, Airbus shares surged by 11.2% as Chinese airlines shifted orders to Europe. Thousands of workers at Boeing factories in Washington and South Carolina now face potential layoffs. Hundreds of U.S. suppliers are also at risk. Additionally, airfare prices, both domestic and international, could rise due to fewer new aircraft and increased production costs. In early April, Chinese exports to the U.S. plunged by 47%. Over 71,000 overdue containers are now stranded at Shanghai port, while 27 cargo ships remain anchored outside the port of Los Angeles, pushing unloading times up to 96 hours. The cost of shipping a 40-foot container from China to Long Beach has surged from $2,000 to over $7,300 within 2 weeks, a jump of more than 250%. Amazon suspended all imports from China on April 7th, while retail chain Five Below canceled $67 million in orders within just 36 hours. Consumers across the U.S. are now facing widespread shortages of household goods. Electronics and apparel prices are soaring online. Orders are increasingly delayed or canceled, and basic living expenses are climbing sharply. Ford has halted production of its F-150 Lightning pickup due to a shortage of microcontrollers, sourced from Shenzhen GM, has cut battery module production by 60% because of inverter shortages. In just the second week of April, nearly 41,000 vehicles were stuck in production delays, causing over $1.6 billion in losses. Hybrid vehicle prices have risen by 6.8 to 8%, and the Ford Mustang Mach-E's MSRP has been adjusted upward due to increased transportation costs. Nationwide used car prices have jumped 4.1%, the fastest pace since the 2021 chip crisis. The dream of owning a new fuel-dash, efficient or electric vehicle is slipping out of reach for many Americans. Used cars are becoming more expensive. New car delivery times are stretching from weeks to months, and overall vehicle ownership costs are surging, putting more pressure on middle-dash class budgets. While U.S. companies are shifting manufacturing away from China to countries like Vietnam, India, and Mexico, infrastructure, labor quality, and product standards in these regions have yet to match China's capabilities. Meanwhile, China is tightening its exports of rare earth minerals, critical for electric vehicles and defense equipment. As of Q1 2025, the U.S. still depends on China for 78% of its rare earth imports. The failure to fully diversify is slowing recovery across key U.S. industries, from high-tech to defense. Consumers are facing higher prices for goods as production costs rise, while job creation in domestic manufacturing falls short of expectations. In the second quarter of 2025 alone, Tesla's sales plunged 38% in Europe. BYD overtook it in global rankings, and its market cap shrank by $135 billion, sending shockwaves through U.S. financial markets. Is America falling behind in the global electric vehicle revolution? Tesla is facing a severe supply chain setback in Europe, with electric vehicle sales dropping 38% in Q2 2025, according to the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, Reuters. The decline is driven by rising trade tensions between the US and EU, new tariff barriers, and shipping disruptions linked to the Red Sea conflict. Meanwhile, Volkswagen reported a 42% surge in EV registrations during the same period, thanks to its domestic production ecosystem and aggressive pricing strategy. Models like the ID.4, Cupra Born, and Audi Q4 e-tron are gaining traction for their lower maintenance costs, affordability, and alignment with the EU's green tax policies. For U.S. consumers and investors, Tesla's decline in Europe signals more than a regional loss. It undermines global revenue, weakens the company's stock valuation, and dents America's credibility in clean tech leadership. Chinese automaker BYD has officially surpassed Tesla as the world's top selling EV manufacturer in H1 2025. According to Bloomberg Neff, BYD capitalized on its vertically integrated supply chain, robust government subsidies, and strategic focus on emerging markets like Brazil, Thailand, and South Africa. Brazil recently launched a federal rebate of up to $3,500 for each imported BYD vehicle, while South Africa and Thailand have granted zero. tariff quotas under new bilateral trade deals, CNBC, with price points ranging from $11,000 to $14,000. BYD's vehicles are rapidly democratizing EV access, contrasting sharply with Tesla's global average price near $40,000. As affordable EVs take hold globally, the US and Tesla are losing ground in shaping green mobility. In April 2025, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund injected an additional $3 billion into Lucid Motors and launched a new EV alliance with Canada and China, Financial Times. Riyadh also announced it would deprioritize raw material exports to Tesla, redirecting supply to partners in the new coalition. As a result, U.S. prices for lithium and nickel rose over 17% in just 6 weeks. Federal EV incentives are being diluted, and American consumers are left with fewer reliable EV options. Saudi Arabia's pivot marks a geopolitical shift, from passive investor in Tesla to architect of a new EV order, in which the U.S. risks being sidelined. Tesla's market capitalization has dropped $135 billion in just 6 weeks, dragging the S&P 500 down by $1.2 trillion and slashing the Dow Jones by over 9%, its worst fall since the COVID. Pension funds, local banks, and insurance firms with Tesla heavy portfolios are facing sharp losses. The ripple effects are hitting households. Retirement account values are falling. Interest rates on loans are rising, and credit for mortgages and EVs is tightening, with Tesla no longer the innovation leader it once was. The U.S. is being excluded from key global initiatives. The U.S. was left out of the Clean Energy Summit in Singapore and excluded from new EV trade agreements between the EU, China, and Canada. American consumers now face a sobering reality: isolation in the EV landscape and a growing risk of being left behind. The U.S.-China confrontation is entering a decisive phase, marked by a series of powerful economic countermeasures. What is driving vehicle prices to surge goods to become scarce, and loan interest rates to spike, all within this very summer. Beijing has instructed domestic airlines to suspend the receipt of Boeing aircraft and temporarily halt the purchase of American aerospace components. Within 48 hours of this directive, Boeing's stock dropped by 9.4%, wiping out approximately $28.4 billion in market capitalization. This move places Boeing in a difficult position, particularly in industrial states, such as Washington, Missouri, and South Carolina, where thousands of jobs are now at risk. Simultaneously, China has tightened export controls on 7 types of rare earth minerals, including gallium, germanium, and dysprosium. These materials are essential for the production of electric vehicles, semiconductors, and defense-related technologies. According to Bloomberg, China currently accounts for nearly 70% of the global supply of these strategic minerals. The new restrictions have pushed up the cost of electronic components, directly impacting the prices of everyday consumer goods, such as smartphones, electric vehicles, and household appliances. At the Port of Los Angeles, the number of ships waiting to unload has surged, with average wait times reaching 96 hours, the highest since 2021. Imports are delayed by 3 to 5 days, driving up logistics costs and retail prices. Consumers now face product shortages, price hikes, and delivery delays. To reduce the impact of tariffs, Amazon has canceled many orders from China and other Asian countries. As a result, products like clothing, electronics, and appliances are delayed by 10 to 21 days, with prices rising between 5 and 15%. The U.S. auto sector is under pressure. Ford has halted production of its electric F-150 Lightning, while General Motors has cut output by 60% at its Tennessee plant due to shortages of Chinese components. Car buyers now face higher prices, fewer discounts, longer wait times, and in some cases, fewer features. Prices and capital flows are undergoing significant fluctuations, reflecting macroeconomic risks arising from escalating trade tensions. In April 2025, the average price of a new car in the United States rose to $47,770, an increase of $2,600.